In the rural parishes of Småland and Dalarna, scattered across the Swedish countryside, you can still walk into wooden cottages that have stood for over 200 years. In the corner of nearly every one, you will find the same thing: a tall plastered brick structure, roughly 3.5 feet wide and 7 feet tall, its surface cracked and smoke-stained from generations of use. It has no ceramic tiles, no ornamental carvings, no iron doors. It looks like the simplest thing in the room. But this object heated entire families through Scandinavian winters that dropped to -22 degrees Fahrenheit, burning a fraction of the wood that an open fireplace consumed. The Swedes called it a Rörspis, the poor man's tile stove. And the engineering hidden inside that plain brick shell was so effective that when scientists finally measured masonry heaters against modern fireplaces, the old design captured over 90% of its fuel's energy. The modern fireplace captured less than 15. So what was inside those bricks that made the difference? And why did the Western world choose the inferior design instead? Let's start with what you are actually looking at when you stand in front of a Rörspis. From the outside, it does not look like much: a rectangular column of brick plastered over with a rough coat of clay mortar, standing in the corner of a one-room cottage. The surface has the matte, uneven texture of hand-applied plaster. On some surviving examples, the plaster has been whitewashed. On others, it has darkened to a deep grey from decades of radiant heat cycling through the masonry. The typical Rörspis stood about 7 feet tall, roughly 3.5 feet wide and 2 feet deep. A full-sized one weighed somewhere between 1,100 and 2,200 pounds. At the base, there was an opening for the firebox. And here is the first difference from what most people imagine. Many Rörspisar had no doors at all. The firebox was open. You loaded the wood, lit it, and watched it burn. Some later versions added a simple iron door to keep embers from rolling onto the wooden floor, but the original design was just a brick opening. Now here is what made the Rörspis different from every fireplace you have ever used. When you light a fire in a modern open fireplace, the hot gases rise straight up and out through the chimney. They take the path of least resistance. The heat is gone in seconds. The chimney acts like a vacuum, pulling 300 cubic feet of heated room air per minute out of your house and replacing it with cold air drawn in through every crack and gap. According to the US Department of Energy, a conventional fireplace exhausts up to 24,000 cubic feet of air per hour to sustain combustion. You are not just losing the heat from the fire, you are losing the heat already in your house. A Rörspis did the opposite. When smoke and hot gases left the firebox, they did not go straight up. They entered a system of internal channels, called rör, which means tubes or pipes in Swedish, that snake through the brick mass of the stove. Up one channel, down the next, up again, down again. In the standard 5-channel system, the hot gases travelled roughly 33 feet through the interior of the stove before they finally reached the chimney. By the time the exhaust exited the building, it had surrendered almost all of its thermal energy into the surrounding brickwork. The chimney exhaust from a well-built masonry heater exits at 200 to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. The exhaust from a conventional fireplace exits at over 1,000 degrees. A fireplace lets the heat escape. A Rörspis forces the heat to stay. Here is the part that matters for your heating bill. Once those bricks absorbed the heat, they did not release it all at once. Brick and clay mortar are what physicists call high thermal mass materials. They absorb heat slowly, store it efficiently, and release it gradually through radiation. A peasant farmer in 1780 would light a fire in his Rörspis first thing in the morning. The fire burned hot and fast because the enclosed firebox and channel system created a strong draft that pulled air through the combustion zone at high velocity. The wood burned at somewhere between 1,500 and 1,900 degrees Fahrenheit inside the firebox. Within 2 to 2.5 hours, the fire was out. The firebox was empty, and the Rörspis would continue radiating heat into the room for the next 12 to 20 hours, depending on its size and mass. One fire, one load of wood, heat all day and into the night. And the Rörspis achieved this with technology that cost almost nothing to build. This is where the story of the Rörspis gets personal, because it was not the first masonry heater in Sweden. It was the poor man's adaptation of one. In the early 1700s, Sweden was facing an energy crisis. The Little Ice Age had gripped northern Europe for nearly 3 centuries, making winters longer and more brutal than anything in modern memory. At the same time, centuries of deforestation had stripped the Swedish countryside. Timber that once seemed unlimited was running out. The iron smelting industry consumed massive quantities of wood. So did shipbuilding, so did construction, and so did heating, because every household in Sweden depended on wood fires to survive winter. By the mid-1700s, the Swedish government was staring at a resource disaster. Too many people burning too much wood in stoves and fireplaces that wasted most of the heat they produced. In 1767, King Adolf Fredrik commissioned architect Carl Johan Cronstedt and General Fabian Raeder, both members of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, to solve the problem. Their mandate was simple: design a stove that used less wood. What they built was the kakelugn, a tall cylindrical tile stove with a system of 5 internal flue channels that forced the smoke to travel up, down, and through the masonry before exiting the chimney. It was 8 times more efficient than the open hearths it replaced. The kakelugn became the signature heating technology of Sweden. Wealthy households installed them in every room. They were clad in beautiful ceramic tiles produced by the Rörstrand and Marieberg porcelain factories. They became status symbols, markers of taste, wealth, and modernity. But ceramic tiles were expensive, and a professional stove mason who could build a proper kakelugn was not cheap either. For the peasant farmer in a 1-room log cottage, the kakelugn was out of reach. So the peasants did what they always do. They stripped the technology down to its essentials. They kept the 5-channel flue system, the engineering that actually mattered. They kept the enclosed firebox. They kept the thermal mass. And they threw out the expensive tiles. In their place, they used raw brick laid with clay mortar from the local riverbank, plastered over with the same clay. The result was a stove that looked nothing like the elegant kakelugn in a Stockholm townhouse, but functioned almost identically. Same channel system, same thermal mass principle, same 90% combustion efficiency. The only difference was the surface, matte plaster instead of glazed tile. They called it a Rörspis, and it heated cottages across rural Sweden for the next 200 years. Now let's talk about what this means for you, and why you are still using a system that a Swedish peasant would have laughed at. The modern open fireplace traces its lineage to the medieval Great Hall, where a massive hearth dominated the centre of the room and smoke escaped through an opening in the roof. When chimneys became standard in the 16th and 17th centuries, the fireplace moved to the wall, but the fundamental design never changed. Fire at the bottom, opening in front, chimney above. Heat goes up and out. For 500 years, the Western world has been building variations of a heat delivery system that operates at 10 to 15% efficiency. Some estimates put it lower. When the fire is not lit but the damper is open, the fireplace can actually have negative efficiency, pulling warm air out of your house through the chimney faster than your furnace can replace it. Even modern forced air furnaces, which operate at 80 to 95% fuel efficiency, have a fundamental problem the Rörspis did not. Forced air heats the air. The Rörspis heated objects. This is the difference between convective and radiant heat, and it matters more than most people realize. When a furnace blows hot air into your room, the air rises to the ceiling. The floor stays cold. The air near the walls cools and sinks. You get temperature stratification. The top of the room might be 80 degrees while the floor is 62. You crank the thermostat higher. The furnace runs longer. Your bill goes up. And the heated air is constantly cycling through ducts, picking up dust, pet dander, mold spores, and whatever else has accumulated in the system. Studies on indoor air quality have consistently shown that forced air systems circulate allergens and reduce humidity, contributing to dry skin, nosebleeds, and respiratory irritation during winter months. A Rörspis produced radiant heat, infrared energy radiating from a warm surface directly into objects and bodies in the room. The same way the sun warms your face on a cold day without heating the air between you and the sun. The floor, the walls, the furniture, your body, they all absorb radiant energy directly. The air temperature can be lower, yet you feel warmer. There is no dust circulation, no humidity loss, no temperature stratification. The room feels evenly, comfortably warm from floor to ceiling. And because the heat source was a massive thermal battery, thousands of pounds of brick that had been charged with a single burn cycle, there were no temperature swings, no furnace kicking on at 3 a.m. and shutting off at 3:15. The temperature in a Rörspis heated room dropped slowly and predictably over 12 to 20 hours, typically varying by only a few degrees between morning and night. So why did we stop building them? 3 enemies killed the Rörspis, and none of them had anything to do with performance. The first was cheap energy. When coal, then oil, then natural gas became widely available in the 19th and 20th centuries, the economic incentive to conserve wood disappeared. Why build a £2,000 brick heater when you can install a cast iron stove for a fraction of the cost and just burn more fuel? The fuel was cheap. Nobody cared about efficiency when energy was practically free. The second was speed. A Rörspis takes time to build. You need a mason who understands the channel system. You need a proper foundation. £2,000 of brick does not sit on a wooden floor. The construction takes days. A modern furnace can be installed in hours. In the 20th century, as central heating and then electric heating became standard, the old masonry heaters were not just abandoned, they were demolished. Between 1950 and 1960, thousands of kakelugnar and rörspisar were ripped out of Swedish homes to make room for radiators and baseboard heaters. The third was building codes. Modern construction standards in most Western countries were written around forced air and hydronic heating systems. Masonry heaters are legal, but they exist outside the standard framework. Most building inspectors have never seen one. Most HVAC contractors do not know how to size one. The institutional knowledge that made Rörspis standard in every Swedish cottage has been almost completely erased from the modern construction trades. But the physics has not changed. Brick still absorbs heat. Clay mortar still stores it. 5-channel flue systems still capture 90% of the combustion energy. And wood is still a renewable fuel source that grows back. If you want to experience what a Rörspis does, you have options. The simplest is to find a masonry heater builder. They exist in North America, Europe, and Scandinavia, and the trade is experiencing a quiet revival driven by people who are tired of paying to heat the sky. The Masonry Heater Association of North America maintains a directory of certified builders. In Sweden, organisations dedicated to building preservation, Byggnadsvård, still teach Rörspis construction using traditional methods. A modern masonry heater based on the same principles as the Rörspis typically costs between $5,000 and $15,000 installed, depending on size and finish. That sounds like a lot until you compare it to the lifetime cost of running a furnace. A well-built masonry heater has no moving parts, no filters to replace, no electrical components, and a useful life measured in centuries, not decades. The cottages in Småland are proof of that. If you want to build one yourself, the materials are not exotic. Standard fire brick for the firebox, regular brick for the channel system and outer shell, clay mortar for the joints, a damper to regulate draft toward the chimney, soot doors for cleaning. The 5-channel system is well documented. Plans are available from masonry heater associations and from Swedish building preservation archives. The construction requires patience, a solid foundation, and an understanding of how the channels need to be sized relative to the firebox. Too small, and the draft chokes. Too large, and the gases pass through too quickly to surrender their heat. One safety note that the peasant builders took seriously, and you should too. The Rörspis needs a proper foundation. It weighs a ton or more. It needs to sit on a masonry or concrete base that can handle the load without settling. And the chimney connection must be properly sealed and maintained. A cracked flue channel can leak carbon monoxide into the living space. Swedish builders inspected their Rörspisar through the soot doors regularly. You should do the same. The Swedish peasant sitting in his log cottage in 1785, warming his hands by a Rörspis he built from local brick and river clay, was not living in the past. He was living with a heating technology that modern science has confirmed as one of the most efficient wood-burning systems ever designed. He spent 2 hours feeding a fire in the morning and stayed warm until the next day. His walls did not dry out. His air was clean. His fuel bill was a stack of birch logs he cut himself. We traded that for a system that sends 85% of its heat into the atmosphere and then charges you for the privilege. Until next time, stay warm.